Hello, everyone. My name is Unmesh. We'll be starting the session in about 2 to 3 minutes. Just waiting for participants to join. Thank you. Okay, we'll get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Good morning or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Unmesh Sheth. This is our webinar series all about outcome, and I'm very excited that you've been joining us regularly on this webinar series. This is a conversation, essentially. This is a conversation about how to maximize social impact. And this is the journey, obviously, we started in 2019. And we are so glad today that we are fortunate to have Emma Morse, who is leading the Accion's Global Advisory Solutions. And she will be talking a lot about the digital transformation and maximizing the impact with the social impact stakeholder engagement process. So very excited to have Emma. Emma, welcome to All About Outcome series.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. As many of you may know, since the journey or conversation we started, many of you may know last year we started with Jane and Veronica, who talked about their work in impact measurement norms. They are one of the leading practitioners and leaders in impact measurement management. They talked about some of the topics like standardizations and frameworks and how it can really help bring the process to really uniformity essentially across the impact investing and also other domain altogether as well. So, and that conversation obviously continued with work with the 60 decibel, which talked about designing stakeholder survey really in a very effective way, because one of the key aspects of impact management is to listening to the stakeholder. And so that really gave us a very good perspective on how to listen effectively to the stakeholders. Followed by Jeremy Nichols, who talked about some of the key principles of impact management, and especially who holds the key of the impact management. So today I'm very happy that Emma is going to take that baton and take it further and talk about something very important, which is really how to define the digital transformation and maturity level. And Accion is one of the leaders in a financial inclusion altogether. Just to give you a little bit more perspective where we are going, next one is very important topic, which is really started in Jeremy Nichols' session. So many of you join us regularly. He mentioned that impact reporting is not impact reporting without verification or without auditing is just the marketing. So let's hear from the two leading practitioners on May 6th, and somebody will be sharing this link. So you are welcome to join that particular next webinar as well. And we will have Paul Herman, who also had many co-authors in the book called Impact Investing. So this is going to be a very exciting event. And right after that, we also have someone from Impact Alliance. Many of you may know the Impact Management Project, and they have come up with the process of classifications of impact from class A to class B to class C. And really, many of us are really trying to maximize the impact. They want a very specific marker and guidelines on how to move the needle from A to B to C type of classification process. So it's going to be very exciting on how to take your enterprises to different level and make it more actionable and more specific altogether. So thank you so much for joining again. I'm going to do very quick intro about Emma. Emma and we met last year, essentially, and we are really a partner in this journey, essentially, with Accion altogether. So I'll let Emma talk about her work with the SOPACT, as well as the general work with the financial inclusion and how they are really creating the space to really create a mature digital transformation approach altogether. So really I'd like to invite Emma to give history about Accion first, talk about her work in digital transformation and financial inclusion, and take us to the journey and stakeholder engagement process, essentially, that Accion is running altogether. So welcome, Emma, and please take it on. And again, I'm very excited that you have agreed to join today. By the way, as a general rule, please feel free to chat and introduce yourself in a chat window. But do not ask the question over there. Ask the question in a Q&A sections altogether. So I'm sure we all have gotten used to Zoom by now. So this will really help us prioritize your questions and answer them in order. And so, Emma?
Great. Thank you so much, Enmesh, and the rest of the SOPAC team for inviting me to speak during this webinar. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here and to share some of our learnings over the past couple of months as we embark on what is hopefully a long-term journey towards impact measurement and digital financial services. I think it's a journey that I would say we're just starting, but certainly is one that we're committed to at Accion and want to leverage the resources and the tools of this network to continue kind of furthering that movement and that journey. So really excited to see the chat starting to light up with folks from all over the world. And as much as possible in this type of setting, would love to make this more of a conversation. So as you have questions, don't be shy, feel free to share those, and we'll try to get to those either throughout the course of the discussion or at the end when we close the presentation. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Great. So as Enmesh said, wanted to structure this discussion in kind of three parts. So share a little bit about Accion, what drives us within the financial inclusion space, and how we work. And then spend a little bit of time talking about our impact journey, how we see our theory of change, and how we're currently working to gather evidence to support that theory of change. And then the final part, wanted to share a little bit about a pilot study that we did towards the middle of last year with one of our partners in India, which was really our first foray into measuring outcomes with end users. And we looked specifically at digital maturity, which is one of the core impact areas that we're looking at furthering through our work. My colleague Priya is also joining us, and she's going to share a little bit about some of the work we've done on financial capabilities towards the end of the presentation as well. So just a really brief background about myself. I have been with Accion for a little over 3 years. I joined working actually with the Center for Financial Inclusion, which is our think tank research arm of the organization, which is really focused on kind of understanding some of the core trends and issues that are surrounding the underserved consumer globally. So looking at issues of data privacy, the digital divide, so gender with respect to access to financial services, as well as climate and other challenges that are kind of underpinning the work that we do. So I joined that team in 2017 and was focused on supporting some of our work around governance, helping board leaders become more active participants in the digital transformation of their companies, as well as think more holistically about issues of consumer protection. And then recently, over the past 2 years, I joined the Global Advisory Solutions team, which is the team within Accion that supports our advisory work. So we work directly with partners, both investees as well as non-investees, around issues ranging from digital transformation, customer insights and strategy, as well as risk and analytics. So a range of services that I'll talk a little bit more when we get into the Accion section. So Accion is a global nonprofit. We've been around since 1961, and our legacy is primarily in the spaces of microfinance and fintech investing. So we seek out high impact organizations that are working to advance financial inclusion, and we support them through investment as well as advisory services. We recognize that financial access, financial opportunities are not available, and this can often be one of the core reasons why someone wouldn't get access to economic opportunities. So low-income businesses in emerging markets often struggle to gain access to capital that they need to grow and start their own businesses. And this is a challenge we see across the globe with respect to the markets that we're working in. So we really kind of come in at that initial stage. We provide access to capital, access to resources to help these companies ultimately serve their customers better and reach more customers. So as I mentioned or alluded to earlier, we approach financial inclusion in a couple of different ways. So we really try to take an integrated approach, bringing our resources with respect to investing, our influence through the Center for Financial Inclusion, as well as the advisory services arm. So we bring all of these resources together to really provide a holistic approach to furthering the financial inclusion movement. So for this discussion, I'll be focusing on the advisory side, as that's where the work sits with respect to measuring the digital transformation of our end users. So the Global Advisory Solutions team really came about because we recognize that the companies that we work with, so financial service providers serving low income and underserved customers, are often struggling to kind of understand their space within a rapidly changing environment. So we've seen a number of different kind of market forces, economic forces, and trends that are influencing our partners and our providers in a myriad of ways. And just to highlight a couple here, we often see new competition coming into these markets in the form of fintech. So technology-driven companies that are trying to solve for the challenges of financial inclusion in really new and innovative ways. We see the emergence of what we call tech fins, so technology companies that don't necessarily have a financial arm, but are moving into that space because they see it as a way to be able to offer complementary services to their customers. So you can think of kind of the Amazons or the Grabs of the world if you're based in Southeast Asia. And we also see, tremendous global challenges such as the COVID-19 pandemic that are, really disrupting the operating models of these companies, where they need to think about new ways to serve their customers. They can no longer access physical channels of service. So there's sort of this rapid need to think about, well, how do I reach my customers in an environment in which, physical meetings are impossible and customers can't repay their loans in a timely manner. So for all of these reasons, this is where we as Glass step in and say, we recognize that these are large challenges and difficult challenges to navigate on your own. So let us come in and help you think through how to adopt a strategy that can help you solve for some of these issues. So we offer a suite of different service offerings, and these are our core service offerings here. But really, these are tailored to the needs of the company. So we start every project we engage in with a diagnostic, so trying to understand where the company is today with respect to their strategy and where they want to go. So that gives us a roadmap, and then we can think about where we plug in with respect with respect to the services that we provide. So many of our projects do fall into one of these categories. And just to highlight a few here, I'll be talking a lot about digital transformation, as that's where the impact assessment is focused on, but we also offer services in design thinking. So we'll come in to a traditional microfinance organization and help them think about how they can use human-centered design and behavioral design to make their products kind of more desirable to the customers that they're serving. We also have, Accion has its own edutech platform called Ovante, and this is to provide direct capacity building and support to micro entrepreneurs to help them learn how to save better and prepare for their future. So a lot of different service offerings that we provide, but really, again, focused on kind of the core challenges that our partners are facing and how we can help them. So in terms of digital transformation, we're currently working on a number of different projects across the globe. So this is just to highlight the current projects we're engaged in. So we have a partner in Mexico and Colombia, Civico, and they're actually a fintech. So they were a technology company that has now become a financial services provider. And we've been helping them think through how do they provide credit to their network of micro entrepreneurs operating in Bogota and Mexico City. We've also recently been working with a company in Bolivia called Banco Sol. Banco Sol is a very successful micro enterprise serving, not micro enterprise, sorry, very successful microfinance bank that is serving about 1 million customers in Bolivia, primarily in La Paz and El Alto. And they wanted to think about how do they create new and innovative products for their micro enterprise customers. So we came in and actually helped them set up a digital lab, a digital factory where they can kind of quickly ideate around different products and services to be able to get products to market faster that will eventually allow customers to access services in a more affordable, seamless, and efficient manner. In terms of our impact approach, so given this model that we have of partnering with financial service providers to serve end clients, which are primarily micro entrepreneurs and underserved individuals, we have a bit of a multifaceted approach to measuring impact. So one side, which we do focus on, is measuring the impact on the institution itself. So typically our projects are anywhere from 1 year to 3 years long. So it gives us a long runway of time to really be able to understand how our work is influencing the transformation of that institution, to be more operationally efficient, to be more customer-centric, and ultimately to have a culture that supports continuous innovation and improvement. So we do have a number of indicators that we look at with respect to the institution when we think about the impact of our services. On the other side, thinking about the client, we have a number of different indicators that we look at there as well. I think we focus on, as I mentioned earlier, micro enterprises as our core kind of customer segment. So we want to understand, of course, how many micro enterprises are we reaching with respect to the breadth? But there's another layer there, which is the depth. So understanding how those enterprises that have now gained access to products and services are using them, and how those products and services are ultimately leading to what we would hope to be improved economic outcomes. So just to highlight kind of the high level there. And then when we go into our theory of change, this just gets a little bit more specific into, well, what does impact mean to us? And I think within this group of attendees, I'm sure impact means, probably 100 different things to each of us. It's something that's very specific to the organization that we're working in. So just to highlight for us, we see access as a necessary first step, but it's certainly not the only outcome that we're interested in measuring. So we measure access, we measure usage, show how active are users of these products and services that we're helping our partners to launch. We're also interested in measuring capability. So as users gain access to these products and services, are they getting more confident? Are they expressing willingness to try new services that the provider might be offering? Are they using the products more frequently? So all of these aspects of capability are also really critical when it comes to thinking about our impact. And then lastly, we're focused on the so what behind all of this. So, once someone becomes a digital user, once they gain access to these products and services, what does that mean in terms of their financial health and their ability to grow their business? And we think that's a really important thing to be able to, at the end of the day, prove out this hypothesis that we have around digital financial services. And it's something we're working towards. So just to give an example of this, because I know I often like to see examples, especially when it comes to theory of change, I wanted to just highlight what kind of this journey looks like for a typical client. So we see oftentimes, clients in the markets that we're working in may have access to a smartphone or a mobile phone of some sort, and maybe they're using their phone in certain ways. So they might use it to access WhatsApp, to communicate with friends and family. So the way we see it is we can leverage those existing channels in many cases and provide access to that new product or service. So once the individual gains access to that, they can start to see how that usage, so for example, in this case, a savings account, they can see how their money is growing. They can see that their money is actively working for them in many cases. And that gives them confidence. So because they can see that their money is in one place, it's safe, they feel confident to deposit more and hopefully save more. And then with that savings, this individual can feel confident that she's able to pay her bills on time, she can manage her finances, she has greater visibility into her business activities. So again, just to highlight kind of one example of how this could play out in a typical project. But I think it's important to also recognize that we're not there yet. So we're, like many of us, we're growing, we're expanding our evidence base, we're trying to be better with respect to outcomes measurement. And I wanted to take a step back and kind of self-reflect on how I think we're doing with respect to measuring our theory of change. So I would say with respect to access and usage, we're pretty good. I think we've, thanks to the support of the SOPAC team, have really started to centralize a lot of our output data in Impact Cloud, and that has given us a lot of visibility into who our interventions are reaching, the usage information around how clients are interacting with products and services. And we can also disaggregate that by gender, by region, and by partner. So I think feeling fairly confident about the output level data that we're collecting. If we move to the right-hand side here, I think this is where there's certainly room to grow within our current activities. We see a lot of work, or some work, around the capabilities side, and Priya will highlight some of the work that her team has done around that. And we're slowly, with the work that I'm going to highlight in this session, starting to move into understanding how different products and services are really influencing customers' growth and resilience. So again, not all the way there yet, but we're I think recognizing where we can grow and trying to build up our capacities in those areas. I think a challenge that a lot of us see, especially working within the digital financial services space, is that it's not enough to, or I should say, you can't move away from access and usage just by relying on the data that you have access to. So with respect to us, I think where we have good access to data is our institutional partners. So institutions are already collecting a lot of data on their clients. Oftentimes with some ease, we can gain access to this, but I think we're seeing that this data is limited. So oftentimes it's transactional in nature. It might give you some indication of how good of a client that client is, how long they've been a client. But in terms of that broader so what narrative of how is that client doing in terms of their financial health and their business growth, that's where we see some limitations in solely relying on that institutional data. I think in the same vein, we have a lot of product level data. So the products that we put out in the market can help us glean additional insights around usage. It might tell us where customers are dropping off or where there might be friction points in the customer journey. But again, that broader so what narrative of how is that product influencing someone's economic resilience is still a bit lost. It's harder to make that connection. So in all of these cases, we're sort of left in the same scenario, which is if we want to be able to measure our theory of change, we need to move beyond the data that we have access to. Which brings us to some of the tools that we're currently leveraging. So within our digital transformation work, we've undertaken a new research project, which is focused on really unpacking how digital products and services are influencing socioeconomic outcomes of end users. So we're interested in understanding digital capabilities, as I mentioned earlier, but we're also interested in understanding financial health and business growth. So we're implementing this in a longitudinal ways, and that will give us insight into over time. So over the course of time that people are using these products and services, how are they seeing their financial health change? How are they seeing their ability to invest in their business change? And how can we start to link that back to some of the products that we're helping our partners launch? So we have two resources that we're using to help support this work. The MSME Digital Maturity Assessment is actually a segmentation tool that we rolled out towards the middle to end of last year. And the kind of objective, the original objective behind this tool was, can we give our partners sort of a basic behavioral segmentation of their customers that goes beyond just what products they're using or what their transaction history looks like. And this was really intended to help our partners, one, understand if the products and services they're rolling out are appropriate for their customers, because we would often see, sometimes partners would launch something on an app and then, only 50% of their customers have smartphones, so they can't access that. So really starting to tie those products and that strategy back to who their customers are and making sure that those are aligned. But over time, we realized that just using this as a segmentation tool was actually limiting the potential of this resource. There was a lot more potential around, if we know capabilities are important in terms of seeing that growth and seeing that resilience change over time, how do we measure this in a more meaningful way? So can we implement an approach where we actually measure this over time, and then we can see, hopefully that digital capabilities are expanding in line with that increased usage. So we actually adopted this as an impact measurement tool, and have been kind of currently thinking about rolling it out with a number of our partners, and have piloted it with that partner in India. In terms of the focus, so there are a couple of different core modules that this tool includes. So one is around digital readiness, and this concerns, how customers are using their phones today. So there's some personal use case scenarios in there, as well as, asking them about how they would think about using it if they were to adopt digital for their business as well. We also look at financial and business readiness. So this looks at how individuals are using digital for business management and marketing, as well as enablers such as the type of device they might be using, or how they prefer to pay their suppliers, or how customers pay them. So a number of different dimensions, again, with a focus on really unpacking those behavioral drivers of digital capability and digital maturity. The second tool, which we just rolled out, we've actually been finalizing it over the past couple of months, is the Digital Product Impact Assessment. And this is a lean survey tool that we developed, leveraging a lot of the resources that Acumen, now 60 Decibels, has rolled out around customer surveys and customer research, as well as the impact management project's 5 dimensions of impact. So this tool incorporates kind of a core impact module that looks at some more general socioeconomic indicators, such as overall improvement in well-being, ability of customers to access alternatives, and then how they can seek out and resolve any sort of challenges or issues they're facing with respect to the product. And then we have specific modules on financial health as well as business growth. And then underpinning all of these resources is some data that we're also gathering from the institution around customer transactions, as well as some data around income, as well as gender and age as well. So that helps to kind of round out the insights that we're gaining. In terms of the approaches, as I mentioned, we've leveraged a lot of the lean data kind of thinking around how to execute on remote surveys. I think a couple of key points to mention here is we don't want this to be a one-off exercise. We really want this to be an approach that can be replicated both within Accion as well as hopefully within other organizations who are interested in measuring digital maturity and digital capabilities of end users. we took painstaking care to make sure that all of the questions incorporated in this survey are yielding some sort of insight that can, feed back into product development. So we're not just asking questions to gain information, but actually really integrating that into the overall product development process. And then something that's iterative. So again, being able to replicate this and really see results over time. Something that's low cost, so can be implemented ideally, over the phone, or even in certain cases directly via mobile device. And then is dynamic. So recognizing the markets that we work in are often dynamic and fast changing. Can we quickly pivot and adopt this tool where needed to kind of match the context that we're working in? So just to highlight the resources that we're drawing from, and I think it's amazing that there is so much out there. I think, we're always looking to contextualize the work that we're doing within the broader frameworks in the impact measurement space. So being able to leverage the 5 dimensions of impact and kind of tag each of our questions to that framework, as well as the resources that 60 Decibels has put out has certainly made our job easier, and I think also provides some benchmark that we can compare our results down the road. So maybe I'll pause there. I just want to see if there are any questions coming through that I can quickly tackle before we move into this next part.
Adam asked about specific indicators that we've used around the culture of enterprises. So, operational efficiency, user centricity. I don't know if you could touch on that. Kind of, what are those indicators specifically?
Yeah, so I think if we're focusing on our partners specifically, so we look at, for operational efficiency, we look at a number of different indicators. So we do look at PAR, which is portfolio at risk, which is a common indicator that a lot of our partners look at to see, how their portfolios are doing. We look at gross loan portfolio as another indicator. We look at turnaround time. So with respect to digital lending, for a lot of our partners, they want to see turnaround time go down. So being able to measure any changes in that is important for them. So hopefully that covers on the institutional side. Great.
I can ask the second question from Ilya Divan, and I'd like to add my own questions to that. So Ilya asked that how do you measure outcome level data or growth in your TOC for shorter projects? That is asked by funders, but the organization has limited resources. How has Accion overcome the challenge? Do you use proximity? And I'd like to add a little bit more to that. What kind of demand do you see from the funders itself towards the outcome-based approach?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's definitely a challenge that we face for the shorter projects, because I think a lot of times the outcomes that we're interested in, the outcomes that are really meaningful at the end of the day, are not outcomes that you're going to see overnight. So oftentimes we're spending, 6 months to a year, even just implementing a product in the market. So then if you think about that year being sort of taken up with implementation, that doesn't give you a lot of time to be able to generate results. So I think I would say on the funder side, I think our funders are really flexible with respect to that. I think oftentimes the process of deciding what we're going to measure and how we're going to measure is something that's co-created with the funder. So we work in tandem, trying to understand what their objectives are with respect to impact, and then kind of align that with the tools that we have at our disposal. And try to, where possible, where we do have those shorter projects, we incorporate proxy indicators that can help us maybe understand and unpack what that end user impact would look like without doing a full longitudinal study. So it's definitely something we're still, I think, experimenting with. We're seeing more and more donors on the funder side really interested in outcomes level measurement. And it's more a process of kind of figuring out what's feasible within the time frame that we have. Priya, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that one.
Well, yeah, I was just going to add on to that because, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but one of the projects that we're working on is in measuring financial health and financial capabilities. And people's financial behaviors don't change overnight. And we know that. And so I think, the way we address this with our funders is just having that conversation with them. Like, we are all here for the same reasons, and we want to see impact on people's financial health over time, but we're just not going to see it in this, X time period or in this project. And I think this is a broader issue in terms of how projects are funded generally, right? Like they fund you for 6 months, but then, you don't have funding to track impact over time. And so I think just making sure that we're being transparent with our funders about what we can actually see and what changes we expect to see in that short time frame is super, super important.
Absolutely.
And Priya, maybe you will go into your presentation, but the digital maturity assessment is, I'm assuming it's more about essentially about creating a roadmap for different maturity level of or capability level of different organizations. And given the fact that the many of the investments are time bound, perhaps having this kind of measured approach can give you a very clear idea where each of this one are essentially. Maybe you can talk about, Eliud, why having that kind of assessment is critical to maximize the impact perspective, because that maturity level, it is true that some way the funding structure is a bit broken and they really do based on the certain project by project basis, but having maturity level helps you at least advance this process, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think maybe just quickly, I think that by doing this assessment or measuring financial health or whatever we're measuring at regular intervals, it also helps us to make refinements to our own program, right? Mm-hmm. So we're making refinements to how we're doing our work, the product, to making sure that we are sort of reaching the objectives that we hope to reach at the end. But yeah, go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, no, it's great because I think we're going to talk a little bit about the implications of some of the findings from the assessment as well. Okay, so moving on to the last section before we get into questions, I just wanted to highlight how we're leveraging this tool, the digital maturity assessment. So we developed the tool, as I mentioned, last year, and we really wanted to, get it out into the market, but I think also recognize that piloting is really important with respect to making those refinements and understanding how this could be of value to our partners. So we did pilot the tool in June of last year. And the institution that we piloted it with was Annapurna Finance, which is one of our digital transformation partners. And they operate an NBFC, so non-banking financial corporation in the Orissa region of India, so Eastern India. They were established in 2009 and they have about 1.9 million customers across their network. So pretty large with respect to microfinance, certainly a larger player in the space. And of their 1.9 million customers, 14,000 of them are MSME customers. We've also been, so as I mentioned, they're a digital transformation partner of ours. So we've been working with them on two products, two digital products. One is what we're calling a just-in-time finance product. So this is a product that they're primarily offering to their group lending customers. So it's essentially a line of credit that customers can access as they need it. So they can access it via SMS. So they text or send an SMS to a number and they can draw down their loan when appropriate and when needed. So it's a pretty innovative product, solving for some of the issues with respect to turnaround time. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes getting access to a loan could be quite a lengthy process. And the second product that we're working on is an end-to-end digital loan for micro enterprise clients that will be accessed via an application. So we implemented the survey. It took about 4 weeks to do the full data collection with 300 customers from AFPL, representing 26 branches. So we tried to get a regional representation across different areas that they're serving. And when we first did it, we did it via phone. So we trained call center specialists of AFPL to be able to conduct the survey themselves. And the benefit of that approach was these were staff members who already had a strong rapport with customers. So they were able to, we think, have a stronger, or we were able to get a stronger response rate because customers were reached by people that they knew. So people who were connected to the institution or affiliated with the institution. So we think that led to a stronger response rate than we might have gotten had we executed the survey independently. We used Excel, we used kind of basic rudimentary survey tools. Given that it was a pilot, we just wanted to be able to test out and understand what resources we would need if we did a full-fledged implementation. And we were able to implement quality control mechanisms by having a number of our team members listen in on the conversations to be able to make sure that enumerators weren't asking leading questions or asking questions in a way that wouldn't have been appropriate. And there were a number of insights that came out of this pilot study, just to highlight a few here. So one that I think is really important, that we often see a lot in our work, is that gender plays a really important role when it comes to digital maturity. And in our findings, we found that women, on average, had lower levels of digital maturity. They were also less likely to own a smartphone compared to men. And when we asked them about valuing human touch with respect to completing transactions, they were more likely to say that that was something that was important to them. So it's definitely some interesting findings around gender there. Another finding that I think was fairly intuitive, but also kind of interesting to see come through in the data, is that when we think about digital confidence, habit formation was really key to building that. So among customers who use technology frequently, which we measured as multiple times per day, they were more than twice as confident in their ability to do different things online. And they also indicated a higher willingness to try new digital tools in the future. One interesting finding was that a lot of the customers we spoke with had a lot of concerns about the information they were finding online. And I think in talking to a lot of our staff in India, I think this is quite common, where customers will receive a lot of different messages via different channels, and it's hard to know often which messages are legitimate. And that, interestingly, was a finding that we saw more among our frequent digital users compared to our less frequent digital users. Additionally, we found that customers weren't often using digital for business management and marketing, which was a little bit surprising because we had heard, especially in India, WhatsApp is extremely common, and we had seen some use cases around using informal WhatsApp channels to be able to market businesses. So I think we were expecting probably a higher level of usage than what we saw, but certainly something that's interesting to unpack in future data rounds. And then lastly, this sort of gets at the ecosystem, the importance of the ecosystem that's underpinning these relationships. But we found that MSMEs who paid their suppliers digitally were much more likely to be digitally mature. So being able to understand and unpack those dynamics is really critical when you're thinking about which sectors you want to focus on, which economic activities. So we delivered a segmentation to our partner. So the digital maturity assessment, there are 4 segments that customers will be grouped into depending on the results. So they'll be scored based on their responses and then grouped into one of these segments. So interestingly, we found that a majority of Annapurna's clients were falling kind of in the middle of the spectrum here. So in the experimenting and emerging segments, very few were what we would consider to be enabled. And these customers were characterized by high levels of digital use, digital savviness, and also a willingness to be able to take on and try additional products and services that the institution might offer. It was more common that clients were using digital tools in limited ways. So perhaps using a WhatsApp channel to connect with family and friends, perhaps engaging in kind of simple transactions via their phones, but often those more kind of complex use cases were not super common. So we delivered this segmentation to AFPL, and it really helped them think about kind of contextualizing the products that they had in development within the digital maturity of their current clients. Just to highlight some of the drivers, so we saw pretty significant differences with respect to nascent and experimenting, so the lower end of the spectrum, and emerging and enabled customers when it came to accessing smartphones. So emerging and enabled customers were much more likely to have access to a smartphone. They were also more likely to have kind of outright ownership of that smartphone, so not share it with family members or friends, which was an interesting finding that came through the research. And then, as I mentioned earlier, they showed a much higher willingness to be able to pay their suppliers digitally compared to those who were in the nascent and experimenting categories. With respect to transaction independence, this is where we saw some really interesting dynamics with respect to gender and age. So you can see in the chart on the left, and the question that was asked to customers was, is it important that I can interact and receive help from a person when completing transactions? So you can see there was a pretty sizable drop-off between the experimenting and emerging groups when it came to this question. And then if we drill down on some demographic information, so looking at age, there was a pretty notable difference between customers in the 25 to 40 age group compared to those in the 41 to 55 year age group. So you can see that even among customers who were in the upper ends of the digital spectrum, there were still some interesting demographic differences there. And then lastly, we did see a pretty big difference with respect to gender on this question. For confidence and trust, we found, as I mentioned earlier, that customers who used technology more frequently had higher levels of distrust in information found online. And to mention that about 56% of all customers who were using digital were using it at least once a week. So we'd say more frequent than infrequent. And then, again, those customers who are using it more frequently did express some reservations in the information they were finding online. So I think it's somewhat of an interesting finding, given that I think we would have expected that customers who are using it perhaps would have more confidence in the information they were finding online, just given that use. But certainly some interesting dynamics that are worth unpacking there in future iterations. And then the last finding I wanted to highlight is around business management and marketing. So as I mentioned, the hypothesis we came into this research with was that we would have expected, I think, a larger number of digitally mature customers to be using mobile phones for business management and marketing, and that actually was not the case. In fact, we only saw that 3% and 6% of respondents were using digital tools for these purposes. And you can see it's quite small, and there's not a ton of variation between segments around this question. So certainly, I think something that's worth unpacking, because we often think about, well, how do we leverage people using WhatsApp as such an important communication channel, to think about different and unique ways to leverage that, and perhaps there's more there that's worth unpacking if we're not seeing that those channels are being used for that purpose. So this gets back to Unmesh, your question around, well, how can providers think about leveraging this information? And one thing that we wanted to be able to build is almost a roadmap based on where institutions are seeing their customers fall along the spectrum. So if I'm an FSP and I do this research and I see that, for example, 75% of my customers are in the nascent and experimenting segments, what does that mean in terms of what I should be offering them that really fits with, that meets them where they are, so to speak. So we built out these digital design principles to be able to support decision-making around what types of products and services should be used. So you can see just some of the examples, and I think AFPL, the client that we piloted the survey with, is a good example of an institution that is really building a product that meets customers where they are. So their solution, which is an SMS-based solution to draw down a loan, captures the fact that a lot of their customers are in this experimenting segment where perhaps accessing a loan via an app is not the best fit for them. So again, just thinking back to, where are your customers and how can you build products that support their digital maturity versus, building something that's not going to be appropriate. And I think this is just highlighting kind of similar themes, but in terms of how our client is using this. Before we came in and did the assessment, they had a very basic customer segmentation. It was basically just looking at the types of products that the customer was using. So by being able to apply this behavioral lens, our client now is able to kind of have a single language with which to understand their customers and really strategize for the future. So think about, again, building products and services that can build and strengthen their digital maturity versus things that might be out of reach or inappropriate. In addition, I think some of the findings around, differences in digital maturity by segment were quite interesting to them. And they were able to realize that for the MSME segment in particular, a lot of these customers are at a point where they can engage in an end-to-end digital product. And they're also able to provide certain data digitally, which removes the need to have any sort of physical channel or any sort of friction point that might limit the digital sort of end-to-end journey that customer takes. So that was a really interesting finding that they were able to highlight from this research that supported the decision to move in that direction. And then lastly, I just wanted to end with talking about some of the current work. So how we're leveraging these resources for the future. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're in the current process of conducting a longitudinal study using both the digital maturity assessment and product impact assessment with all of our digital transformation partners over the next 2 years. And this will be focused on really being able to understand how the work that we're doing as Glass is supporting both the digital maturity as well as strengthening the outcomes of end users of these products. So we'll have 3 survey rounds about 6 to 9 months apart. Each round is, very clearly linked in with our product roadmap so that we can adjust as needed and hopefully use those findings to inform the strategies and approaches we're taking. So we're excited about this next line of work, and hopefully over the next couple of months we'll be able to release a lot of this data publicly. We're already planning for a dashboard that can be used to share these insights. So yeah, look forward to sharing this work with all of you, hopefully, and happy to now turn it over to Priya to talk a little bit more about how we're measuring financial capabilities.
Well, I'll get to that in a second, but maybe before I do that, I'll have you address a couple of questions that have come in.
Sure.
So Abdul asked in the chat, and you might have to go back a few slides, but why we have 0% for enabled.
Let's see if I can jump back. Was this the slide Abdul was?
Perhaps. Okay, but yet I do now seeing that it is 8% that are classified as enabled.
Yeah, so about 8% of the overall sample, so the 300 clients with whom we spoke were segmented into enabled.
Perfect. And then I think another interesting question that came in from Dr. Ahmed was about whether we have considered thinking about sustainability in our impact framework. So sustainability of the product, I'm assuming. I don't know if that's something that you've thought about.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess I'd want to know a little bit more about how sustainability is defined, but I think in terms of how we think about it, I think sustainability with respect to how relevant that product is and how long lasting it is. And I think that goes back to the way that we engage with partners and the methodology that we seek to instill within their process. So we come in and we take a very human-centered approach. So we spend the first couple of months of our project just understanding their customers and understanding what's worked, what products they've put out that have been really successful, what perhaps hasn't been as successful, and try to really unpack and diagnose those determinants so that when we come in and propose our solution, it is tied back to those learnings. So I think that's one way we can support from a business model sustainability. I think if we're thinking about sustainability in terms of climate, I think that's an area that we're trying to, grow in and explore in terms of how we can support customers who have been impacted by climate change and what sort of product sets might be appropriate for them. But that's definitely something that I think we're more early days in learning from. So yeah, would love to hear from others who have experience in that.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, I know that we have 5 minutes left. So let me quickly just walk through the financial capability stuff, and then we can come back to some of the other questions that have come in. So, as Emma alluded to earlier, I am leading the charge on the impact assessment for a different project. And this other project actually precedes the work that Emma has done. So many of the learnings that we've seen have kind of gotten into some of the digital maturity assessment and those things that Emma has spoken about. But the project that we're talking about here is a project that we're doing in Latin America, where we are working to build products using a human-centered design methodology that will influence and build people's financial capabilities. And the end outcome that we hope to see is that they then have greater financial health. And because they have greater financial health, they're living more happy, productive lives. And so that we increase their well-being. So this slide right here just shows kind of our theory of change. So there are, many things that might influence a person's financial capabilities, including, what is their income, country factors, cultural factors, their demographics, whether they're a woman or a man, what social networks they have. And all those things go into determining, okay, what are your knowledge and your skills and your attitudes around your finances? And that's how we define financial capabilities. And we truly believe that if you build products in a certain way that can help to influence these financial capabilities and build them, it then leads to healthier financial behaviors, which then leads to greater financial health and then to well-being. So this is just kind of the theory of change in which we're working within. So in this project, we are working specifically on building the financial capabilities. And so the way that we're doing this is, as I think what many people here know, that measuring impact is hard. Especially something like financial capabilities, which is soft, right? It's not tangible. It's hard to measure. And so the way that we have done this is we've engaged with a vendor to build a very digital savvy and easy to follow platform to do these surveys, but in a way that doesn't feel like a survey. It feels like a game and it feels fun. So on the right, these screenshots are basically just kind of examples of what the survey is. So essentially it's an application and you will answer questions in a way that's very visual. So this first question, and it's all in Spanish, but we're asking people, how satisfied do you feel with your financial situation? And rather than, having to read a survey, which, obviously there's literacy issues in many of the markets we work in, we just use emojis. And, you pick the one that pertains to you. And it's a quick click and it takes you to the next question. So we typically include about 30 to 40 questions in our surveys to measure financial capabilities, and they take about 4 to 7 minutes to complete. And we've seen that if surveys, take longer than 7 minutes, that the response rate, drops dramatically. So that's just kind of an example of what the survey looks like. And then we always want to provide value back to the respondent, after they've completed a survey. So we provide them with a profile. And so the last screenshot here on this page is, how are you doing in your business? So this profile that this person received says like, you are breaking barriers. You are doing really well. You are, superseding and rising above this crisis that is happening right now with COVID-19. And so I think that's just a kind of a quick example of how we are trying to measure impact in a way that is fun, generates responses. And similar to what Emma shared, we are doing a baseline measurement, a midline measurement, and a final measurement using the same sort of practice. So I don't want to get too much more into that, and I see that we have 2 minutes left, but I think at this point we're happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat now to see if there's anything that's come through.
Yeah, I see. This is an interesting question from Diane in the chat. I think this has to do with the incongruous finding about the inverse relationship between the frequent use of digital tools and the mistrust of information, and how we're addressing this.
Yeah, you have an interesting finding around that one.
my quick reaction is, yes, this is super challenging. And I think as we are trying to encourage, you know, the users that we work with to go more digital, you know, cybersecurity and hacking and phishing are only becoming more prevalent. And so part of what we're doing, especially through this tool called Avante, which Emma described at the very beginning, which is an educational tool to build capabilities of our users, is to help people identify, you know, what are trusted sources of information on the internet and what are not trusted sources of information. And, you know, you can really only sort of get to understand, you know, what you can trust and what you can't after more frequent use of digital tools. So I think providing that information and helping people to understand is a critical part of what we kind of aim to do here. I don't know if you have anything else to share on that one.
No, I think it goes back to sort of the intentionality of the design at the end of the day. And if we are seeing that users, you know, have these sets of hardships around, you know, I don't think it's just misinformation, but I think there are a number of issues. It's how do you build that into the product itself? How do you build that kind of understanding or that ability to help customers understand into the product so that they feel that confidence? So it's not something that is necessarily external, but it's something that's really embedded within that. So I think that's definitely the approach we've been taking. But yeah, it's difficult. It's hard to be able to do that all the time. So, you know, certainly thinking through different approaches there.
Well, thank you, Priya, and thank you, Emma, for a wonderful presentation. I think, as many of you may know, the topic of impact measurement is full of complexity and the maze, essentially. And that is here in All About Outcome series, we are trying to really peel the onion shell, essentially, and really give a light on various complexities from digital maturity model to standardization frameworks, benchmarking, and impact verification. So I really appreciate Emma and Priya for sharing your knowledge and perspective from financial inclusion perspective. It's a very important and very large segments of users who are really benefiting from the financial inclusion process. And this conversation will continue. And really thank you for your time today. And thank you, all of you, to be joining and tuning in regularly in our All About Outcome series. And we'll see you in the next one, which is going to be on May 6th about impact verification. So thank you all, and we'll stay in touch. Bye-bye.
Thank you.